Hello everyone, and welcome back to another Cozy Den book reading. Before we get into today's material, a cursory reminder to like and subscribe if you enjoy this content, as it helps to support our channel, and if you wish, do check us out on the Cozy Den Discord, and even come join my live streams daily as well. But now, today, we have notes on the Redguards, their history, and their heroes. This is a collection of tales, myths, and history of the Redguards. Much of their history is shrouded in mystery and in the mists of time. It is hard, therefore, to distinguish between myth and reality. And this is noted by the author that it is as translated into the modern tongue of Hammerfell. Frandar Hunding was born in 2356. In the old way of reckoning, in our beloved deserts of the old land. The traditional rule of emperors had been overthrown in 2012, and although each successive emperor remained the figurehead of the empire, his powers were very much reduced. Since that time, our people saw 300 years of almost continuous civil war between the provincial lords, warrior monks, and brigands, all fighting each other for land and power. Our people were once artisans, poets, and scholars. But the ever-evolving strife made the way of the sword inevitable. The song of the blade through the air, through flesh and bone, its ring against armor, an answer to our prayers. In the time of Lord Frandar, the first warrior prince, lords called Yakuda built huge stone castles to protect themselves and their lands. And castle towns outside the walls begin to grow up. In 2245, however, Mansell Sesnit came to the fore. He became the Elden Yakuda, or military dictator, and for 8 years succeeded in gaining control of almost the entire empire. When Sesnit was assassinated in 2253, a commoner took over the government. Randik Torn continued the work of unifying the empire which Sesnit had begun, ruthlessly putting down any traces of insurrection. He revived the old gulf between the warriors, the sword singers, and the commoners by introducing restrictions on the wearing of swords. Torn's sword hunt, as it was known, meant that only the singers were allowed to wear swords, which distinguished them from the rest of the population. Although Torn did much to settle the empire into its pre-strife ways, by the time of his death in 2373, Internal disturbances still had not been completely eliminated. Upon his death, a civil war broke out in earnest. War that made the prior 300-year turmoil pale in comparison. It was in this period that Frendar Hunding grew up. Hunding belonged to the Sword Singers. This element of Empire society grew from the desert artisans and was initially recruited from the young sons and daughters of high families. They built the first temple to the unknown gods of war, and a training hall, the Hall of the Virtues of War. Within a few generations, the way of the sword, the song of the blade, had become their way of life. The people of the blade kept their poetry and artisans in building beautiful swords woven with magic and powers from the unknown gods. The greatest among them became known as Ansei, or Saints of the Sword. Each of these began their own training schools, teaching their individual way of the sword. Those Ansei of the highest virtue wandered the countryside, engaging in battle, righting wrongs, and seeking to end the strife. To sum it up, Hunding was a sword singer. A master? No, a master Ansei at a time when the peak of strife was reborn out of the chaos of Torn's death. Many singers put up their swords and became artisans, for the pull of the artisan heritage was strong. But others, like Hunding, pursued the ideal of the warrior, searching for enlightenment through perilous paths of the sword. Duels of revenge and tests of skill were commonplace, and fencing schools multiplied. Frendar do Hunding Hel Ansei no Shira, or as he is commonly known, Frendar Hunding, was born in the far desert marches in the province of High Desert. Hunding is the name of the High Desert region near where he was born. No Shira means noble person or person of noble birth, and Hel Ansei is his title of sword sainthood. Hunding's ancestors reach back to the beginning of recorded time in the high desert and were artisans and mystics. His grandfather was a retainer of the Elden Yokida, a Mansell Seznit, and led many of the battles of unification prior to Seznit's assassination. When he was 14, Hunding's father died in one of the many insurrections, and he was left to support his mother and 4 brothers. His prowess with the sword, however, made his life both difficult and easy. Easy in that his services came in great demand as a guardian and escort. Difficult in that his reputation preceded him, and many awaited their turn to face him in battle and gain instant fame through his defeat. By the time Hunding was 30, he had fought and won more than 90 duels, killing all of his opponents. He became virtually invincible with the sword, gaining such skill and mastery that he finally stopped using the real swords created through the artisanship of his people and began using the Shehai, or Way of the Spirit, sword. All sword singers learn through their intense training and devotion to the gods of war and Way of the Sword, the forms of discipline that allow the creation of the Spirit Sword. This is a simple form of magic or mind mastery, whereby an image of a sword is formed from pure thought. The sword singer forms the sword by concentrating, and it takes shape in his hand, usually a pale thing of light, misty and insubstantial, a thing of beauty perhaps, a symbol of devotion to the way and the gods, but no weapon. However, those Ansei of the highest level and sensitivity, and those with talent in magic can, at times of stress, form a spirit sword, the Shihai, which is far more than light and air. It is an unstoppable weapon of great might, a weapon which can never be taken from the owner without also taking his mind. The Shihai became Hunding's weapon, and with this he slew bands of brigands and wandering monsters that infested the land. Finally, upon his 90th duel, defeating the evil Lord Janik and his 7 lich followers, he was satisfied that he was indeed invincible. Hunding then turned to formulating his philosophy of the Way of the Sword. He wrote his learnings down in the Book of Circles, whilst then living as a hermit in a cave in the mountains of High Desert in his 60th year. In that year, Hunding, having enlisted in many battles of the Empire, defeating all opponents, had thought himself ready for death and retired to his cave to capture his strategy and mystical visions to share with the other sword singers. It was after his completion of the scroll of the circle that the singers found him composing his death poem and preparing to join the gods of war in final rest. At 60, he was a vigorous man who thought himself through with life, but his people, the sword singers, needed him. They needed him as never before. Torn's sword hunt had separated the singers from the common people, and the rise of the last emperor began the last great strife of the Desert Empire. the Emperor and his consort, Eliza's final effort to wrest control of the Empire from the people by destroying sword singers. Hera vowed to search out every singer with his brigand army composed of orcs and cast-offs of the wars with the Empire, and to scourge them from the face of the planet. The sword singers were never a numerous people. The harsh desert kept their births few, and growing up in the unforgiving wastes eliminated all but those of iron spirit and will. Thus, the final strife, which became known as the War of the Singers, found the people of the sword unprepared and unready to join together their individually great skills into an army that could defend their homes and their lives. Frandar Hunding was sought out, his death poem interrupted, and unceremoniously command of the singers was thrust upon him. To the unknown gods of war, great thanks is owed that Hunding had the time in his cave to write down his years of accumulated wisdom, of strategy, of the way of the Shihai. The singers fled from their camps up into the desert hills and mountains, fled to the foot of Hatu, the father of mountains, where Hunding had gone to write in peace and to die. And there these remnants formed into the army of the Circle. They learned Hunding's way, his strategies, his tactics, and the final great vision for a master stroke. Hunding devised a plan of 7 battles, leading the armies of Hera further and further into the wilderness to the foot of Hatu, where the final battle could be fought. Hunding called his plan the Hammer and the Anvil. With each battle, Hunding's singers would further learn his strategies and tactics, grow strong in the use of the Shihai, and be ready to defeat their opponents in the 7th battle. And thus it was. The 6 first battles were waged, each neither victory or defeat, each leading to the next. The larger armies of Hera following the small army of Hunding. Outnumbered 30 to 1, the singers never faltered from the way. The stage was set. Hera and his army maneuvered to the base of Hatu Mountain, where the hammer blow was delivered. The battle was pitched, and many singers fell that day. Hunding knew that the singers who lived would be few, but Hera and his empire of evil would not live, and so it went. At the end, Hunding and less than 20,000 singers survived the day. but no army of evil was left to pillage and murder. More than 300,000 fell that day on the Hattu. Of those who were left to run and live, all were scattered to the four winds, and organized force no more. The singers packed their lives, folded their tents, mourned their dead, and followed Hunding to the great port city of Arch in the province of Seawind. There, Hunding had a flotilla of ships waiting. The singers left their desert for a new land. No longer welcome in the desert empire, they left to be sung about and spoken of in legend. The final great warrior singers of Shihai, the Book of Circles, all leaving that land where their virtue was unappreciated. Red with blood they were in the eyes of the gentle citizenry. Never mind that they had saved them from a great evil. The singers vowed to learn new ways as they traveled across the great ocean to their new land, to adopt a new name, but to honor the past. In honor of their final battle, they named their new land Hammerfell and adopted the name Redguards. In honor to Hunding the great warrior prince, each household in Hammerfell has a place by the hearth, an alcove really, just a niche, big enough to hold the scroll, the Book of Circles. And there we have it, everyone. A wonderful, fascinating tale on the history of the Redguards and their heroes, etc. And of course, a day that we now know from our previous reading is celebrated as a big holiday as well. So it does tie in kind of to our theme at the moment. Look, it's not that much material, okay? Sometimes we stretch it. But alas, that is all for today. So I will see you all back next time. But until then, remember, if you have any suggestions or requests for what else you would like us to read on the channel, let me know in the comments below. But until next time now, everyone, stay cozy.